They've gone north, they've gone back to wherever they come from. The conscripts, it would look as if they have deserted, and there is nothing here but empty barracks.
Late last night, people in the towns and villages surrounding Basra invited an advancing battalion of British paratroopers into their communities. They were asking for protection from retreating elements of the Ba'athist regime. In the town of Adaya, the looting was well underway. How poor is a society when the biggest prizes are bits of old timber and rusty sheets of corrugated iron? Coalition commanders have described this war as one of liberation. And in this part of Iraq, at least, that's exactly what it seems to be. Those who enforced the rule of Saddam Hussein are no longer in power, and there is now the heady, chaotic atmosphere of newfound freedom, where the symbols of the regime are defaced, if not destroyed. The iron grip in which Saddam held this society has been prized open. The next challenge is finding a fair government for the people that survive him. Geraint Vincent, Southern Iraq.
First thing this morning saw the resumption of the battle for Baghdad. The Americans had decided to push deeper inside the city. The main thrust was again along the western riverbank, but they did seem to be coming in from all directions. These Cobra helicopters are over the southeast, and this is an A-10 tank buster directly over our heads, weaving and putting out flares and positioning to use the fearsome Gatling gun in its nose. It's the Iraqi Ministry of Planning. He came round for a second go as well. This has been a stunning advance by the US forces. This morning they've moved right along that far riverbank, past a couple of presidential palaces, and all the way to the administrative heart of Baghdad, to those government buildings which were bombed so heavily in the opening days of the war. US troops are now fighting in their midst. They're also trying to secure that first bridge over the Tigris. And soon they appeared, American Abrams tanks on the bridge, their gateway to the eastern half of the Iraqi capital. They stopped to clear the way on the far riverbank, first firing machine guns at Iraqis hiding in trees. Then they opened up with their big guns. This prominent office building was a prime target for the American gunners. Throughout it all, the Iraqi information minister is still exuding confidence.
They are going to surrender. They are going to surrender or be burnt in their tanks.
You're not frightened now, sir?
Not at all, not at all. And you don't be frightened. We are going to tackle them and to destroy them.
But the defenders of this city are completely outgunned and rapidly losing ground. John Irvine, ITV News, Baghdad.
And the final elements of the vicious Ba'athist control extinguished. The people now have the opportunity to live in an atmosphere devoid of fear and oppression and achieve a greater degree of self-determination that they have not known than they have known for many years and which they have sought for. We, the British military in the Basra province, will now turn our efforts to assist them.
Arab waterway, I hope you can see them now, which runs alongside the palace here, of Royal Marine commandos patrolling that waterway, searching fishing boats and making sure that there's no infiltration into Basra from across the waterway by Saddam loyalists. That is going on, as well as patrolling on the streets of Basra itself.
The battle is still continuing, but the only thing ordinary Iraqis now care about is that it ends as quickly as possible. Raghi Omar, BBC News, Baghdad.
Has now been captured by the U.S. Marines. We understand it's the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. They are on the objective there, and apparently they may have been supported by tanks and did not have a great deal of opposition taking that airbase. Significant now because you've got 2 airfields, one in the west, one on the east side of Baghdad, now in control of coalition forces. As for the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, we rolled into Baghdad before the sun came up today, crossing over a canal, and then officially coming into Baghdad itself. After we crossed that canal, lead elements immediately came under attack. Not heavy organized fire, but still dangerous fire, obviously, for the Marines. They returned fire, destroyed apparently, or drove off the attacking elements. And then the Marines moved into a grove, really, of palm trees, a forested area, and made a significant find as far as weaponry that apparently had been hidden under the canopy there by the Iraqi military. This included artillery of anti-aircraft variety, also long-range artillery, and a lot of ammunition. So then the Marines went into destruction mode. This was not carefully planned. They were on the move. They had other objectives to hit. So what they basically did was get out the hand grenades and get out these hand grenades that also burn at an incredible heat, and began tossing those into the weaponry systems there. You trigger an explosion. You start burning off the weapon system there, damaging it so that it cannot be used. The other thing that happens, though, of course, is that you start cooking off a lot of the ammunition stored around there. So it was a pretty busy time for them as far as getting and blowing up that material. It's a risky thing. You see the Marines running in, dropping in the hand grenade, and then quickly running out of the way. Probably not standard demolition practice, but again, they had other objectives to reach. They had a lot of material they had to destroy, so that's the way they went about it. While they were doing that, the other elements of the Marines began closing in on an industrial complex. This is a huge, sprawling facility, warehouses, factories, and industrial sites. And they had 2 objectives there. One, they believed that there may have been forces loyal to Saddam hiding out there. They did find them. They did engage them. Also, to a number of sensitive sites they thought might be involved with the weapons program for the Iraqi regime. Found those buildings, but they're still searching to see if they have found anything suspicious inside. The fighting inside that complex at times was somewhat intense, but the Marines had anybody who was fighting them heavily outnumbered, especially with weaponry. So that's the way it's shaped up so far. It's quieted down now. The Marines are in Baghdad, perhaps not as high profile as the Army, but they're pushing up from the southeast and not that far away from the Army in the west. Jim?
They go, and then they suddenly explode. We hear 2 large explosions. Military sources have told CNN the targets this time were the Ba'ath Party headquarters in downtown Baghdad. The second target was said to be the Iraqi Information Ministry. We're not close enough to tell you whether those bombs were on target or not, but earlier in the day, Army sources told CNN that the Special Republican Guard headquarters and the Republican Guard headquarters in Baghdad had also been hit. This same Army colonel told CNN there is no longer any, quote, organized military opposition to the U.S. forces moving about in Baghdad now. That is not, however, to say that it is not dangerous inside Baghdad. There are freelance groups, Iraqis, who do not want to capitulate. Some of these Iraqis are Fedayeen militants or perhaps Republican Guard remnants. They are still running around shooting. Earlier in the day, they injured 6 U.S. Special Forces soldiers. They had to be medevaced out of the city. And as the U.S. Army and other units, the Marines as well, come into closer contact with the Iraqi citizens, they're getting a first-hand look at what has happened here during the course of the bombing. In the past few hours, 7th Cavalry was out in the southern suburbs of Baghdad, and they were literally thronged by some of the residents of the southern suburbs of Baghdad. Suddenly the Army, which had been fighting a war, had to become a problem solver and an ombudsman. One Iraqi came up and presented a handwritten note that read, I want to retrieve a dead body. I am unarmed. Please help me. There were others in that same situation. I saw one incident where an Army officer did indeed offer to send a Bradley tank following a man driving a white pickup truck down the road, and they did go out to try to retrieve some bodies. Other individuals were just trying to be reunited with their families. They sought permission to cross the military lines and pick up a taxi cab. There was one very interesting encounter when one Iraqi man came up, pulled an Army translator aside and said, I want to take you to where the Fedayeen killed an American soldier missing in action. I will show you the American soldier's grave. There was some concern about this, of course, because it might well have been an ambush. So one American officer went up to this Iraqi and said to him, through a translator, "If you are lying to us, if indeed you mislead us, I will personally shoot you if we are shot at." That man suddenly disappeared into the throng again. Jim?
U.S. troops.
This is the coalition front line in the Bower region of northern Iraq. Retreating Iraqi forces blew this bridge on their way out of here. Now young Peshmerga fighters swim beside it in a river where anti-tank mines lie just below the water's surface. YASEEN MOHAMED is in charge of this Russian-designed RPK machine gun. He's been a Peshmerga for just 6 months, but at age 21, he already has a lifetime of hatred for the regime of Saddam Hussein.
The regime killed my uncles. That's why I became a Peshmerga, to put an end to the regime.
Like YASEEN MOHAMED, many of the Peshmerga fighters are motivated by their suffering, the disappearance of their family members, they say, at the hands of Saddam Hussein. The Kurds say that in 1988, Saddam Hussein's forces began a campaign of genocide called the Anfal, named after a portion of the Quran. They say that 180,000 Kurds were killed or disappeared during that campaign. To a man, most of the Peshmerga on this front line say they've lost friends or family members during the Anfal. Peshmerga fighter Najamuddin Saeed Mohammed says the Iraqis took his wife and 5 children in April 1988. He says he has not seen their faces since, except when he goes to sleep.
I see them in my pillow at night.
Since their disappearance 5 years ago, he says he has never cut his beard. Until now, with coalition airstrikes hitting Iraqi-occupied cities in the north, he has found hope and his razor.
Look at my face. I am flushed. This is the only thing that makes me smile. The end of Saddam Hussein.
When asked if they will fight if a northern front opens up here, these Peshmergas say they've never stopped. Kevin Seitz, CNN, the Bower region in northern Iraq.
Images of the Iraqi leader once again being broadcast on state television as if he was still in command. The US has made a second attempt at what it calls decapitating the regime, attacking a house in Baghdad where Saddam was said to be holding a meeting with his sons. 14 people are reported to have been killed. At its daily briefing in Doha, US military command was asked if the Iraqi leader was among the dead.
We had credible information that indicated that there was a regime leadership meeting occurring yesterday. While it's not useful to get into any speculation on who might have been present at that meeting, what we will say is that we had an opportunity. As we've said before, we respond to opportunities, but we had an opportunity to attack that particular regime leadership meeting. We believe that the attack was effective in causing destruction of that facility. As to who was inside and what their conditions are, it will take some time before we can make that full determination.
There were persistent questions too about the attack on Baghdad's media hotel, the Palestine.
Initial reports indicate that the coalition force operating near the hotel took fire from the lobby of the hotel and returned fire. And any loss of life, civilian loss of life or unintended consequences, again, we find most unfortunate and also undesirable.
Journalists report hearing no fire coming from their hotel towards the Americans. As for the barrels of suspected chemical weapons materials found south of Baghdad 2 days ago, a US officer on the ground has said initial tests were negative. These don't seem to be the smoking gun, weapons of mass destruction that could justify the war. US Central Command says it's too soon to be sure. Andrew Burrows, BBC News.
This is looting Iraqi style. Almost nothing's being left behind. What the battles didn't destroy, the people are demolishing. Basra is in chaos. This was the center of the city just hours ago. British troops fired in the air. Looters were raiding a truck of food and water. The British troops here struggled to keep the peace. Do you think that the British military can police this city properly?
No, that's not our issue. Our aim has been here to defeat the regime. What we're doing at the moment is starting to win the trust of the community by making sure that they've got water, which is the one thing they want more than anything else. There are follow-on forces who will do all that.
But there's little time to wait for new policemen. Hour by hour, Basra's schools, its infrastructure is being dismantled. There was order before the British came, this man told me. Now look at it. The Shat Al Arab Hotel was one of Basra's finest. Less than 24 hours ago, this was a 5-star hotel with all the luxuries that you might expect. But it took a few hundred people just 2 hours to completely gut this place, and now there's almost nothing left. Inside, it's absolutely bare. Every wire's been stripped, everything of value taken. Britain says it's here to give Iraq a future, but the building blocks for that today in Basra are coming down. Hilary Anderson, BBC News in Basra.
BBC television. These, as you can tell, again there from the caption, come to us from Abu Dhabi Television, one of the main television channels in the region. And these are filmed obviously from a private car driving through the streets of Baghdad just a little earlier today. Inevitably they will jump around from time to time, but there you see dramatically in the centre of your picture, that is a strike on the Ministry of Information, we understand, in the centre of Baghdad.
Well, we've seen a ferocious bombardment in Baghdad in the last hour and a half. When we were speaking to our correspondents in that time, you could hear the jets flying very low over the Iraqi capital. And actually, just looking at these pictures, you can see not very many people there on the streets, just a few people there. You see one man with a shoulder-launched rocket grenade. So still very much evidence of pockets of little resistance despite all of this ferocious bombardment that has been going on in Baghdad. Of course, we've had news today of these 4 bunker busters that they deliberately targeted Saddam and his 2 sons in the Al-Mansour district. It's still unclear if they were successful in that part of the operation, but it gives you a clear idea as you see these pictures as they drive through the centre, just the sorts of scenes there in the Iraqi capital.
What we've also been hearing about today, which is a similar problem to Basra, although it's not quite as severe yet in Baghdad, but there are areas where there is a considerable amount of looting going on as well. It doesn't appear to have been picked up.
We'll start out in the south and move our way northward. If you remember, we talked earlier about the UK troops in and around Basra. Of course, they're reporting they're in control, and they're saying that they are significantly assisting now, trying to rout remaining irregulars and overseeing the humanitarian assistance programs, etc. Moving northwards, it was Brigadier General Vince Brooks that said this area right here, there remains a question mark on the battlefield, Tikrit and Kirkuk, that Special Operations Forces working with their Peshmerga counterparts are now in blocking positions to prevent existing Iraqi forces moving southwards. Of course, Tikrit, being the birthplace of Saladin, known to have crushed the Christian Crusade, as well as Saddam's birthplace, is going to be gingerly handled. Let's move to the Baghdad map now, if we would, and we'll take a look at very heated contesting of terrain right in this area right here. You've been reporting all morning, of course, of the situation there. Of note, the Marines on the southeast sector of the city are now reporting that they are in control of the Al Rashid Air Base, which, of course, along with Baghdad Airport, gives them control of all the air assets in the area. Still, elements of the 3rd Infantry Division have consolidated on objectives they previously took and are moving forward now towards the Ba'ath Party headquarters in this region right here. And I'm sure we're going to see some more activity as this campaign proceeds. Jim, back to you.
Started moving cautiously along the river Tigris from the bridgehead they'd captured yesterday, the presidential compound. They came under heavy fire. The resistance was so strong, commanders on the ground called in air support. First, F-15 and F-16 fighter jets repeatedly bombed Iraqi positions. Then we saw an A-10. This plane has 2 nicknames. It's called the Warthog because of its distinctive roar. And it's known as the Tank Buster because of its firepower. This is what it did to the Iraqi Ministry of Planning building, where it's believed sniper units had been taking cover. We saw 2 A-10s in the sky. One later came down close to the main American base at Baghdad's international airport. The bombing allowed the tanks to continue their advance. The battle for Baghdad has now reached a decisive point. American tanks have just reached the River Tigris. They're on the bridge and they're trying to battle their way across to the other side of the city. As the battle for the bridge continued in the other direction for the first time, we saw American helicopters in the sky. I asked one of Saddam Hussein's key advisors whether it was time now to admit defeat. We now see American tanks on the river bridges. We see American helicopters just a short distance away in the air.
Yeah.
Isn't it time now that you surrendered or sued for peace?
They are going to surrender. They are going to surrender or be burnt in their tanks.
You're not frightened now, sir?
Not at all, not at all. And you don't be frightened. We are going to tackle them and to destroy them.
Thank you,
don't
sir.
be afraid.
This evening, an F-15 fighter continued to fly over the city. Things remain extremely tense. James Bayes, Baghdad, 5 News.
Secret police and heard allegations of appalling torture. Viewers may find some of the images disturbing.
Saddam Hussein's Iraq is a state of terror, and this is where it's planned and perpetrated. The headquarters of his secret police, this one in Basra. No British soldier has been here yet. Today, as I walked in, I met Iraqis, none of whom had ever been inside willingly.